London, spring of 1818. The chandeliers of Lord Thornfield's ballroom cast a golden glow across the assembled company, illuminating silk gowns in every hue of the rainbow, and reflecting off jewelry that adorned the throats and wrists of the ton's most elevated members. Yet their warmth could not penetrate the invisible wall of whispers and sidelong glances that surrounded Lady Octavia Drummond as she stood near the refreshment table, a practiced smile of serene indifference fixed upon her still handsome face. At 39 years of age, partially concealed behind a marble column adorned with hothouse roses whose perfume filled the air with cloying sweetness, she had become a permanent fixture of the season's social landscape. She was present at every major gathering, yet somehow invisible to those who mattered, watching with the detached interest of a scholar observing an experiment as 2 full decades of younger women glided and giggled their way into promising futures. She remained frozen in the amber of the scandal that had destroyed her own matrimonial prospects at 19. Her gown of deep sapphire silk was elegant and expensive, cut in the very latest fashion, with delicate silver embroidery tracing patterns of ivy along the hem and sleeves. But it might as well have been fashioned from the plainest muslin for all the masculine attention it garnered. It was precisely then, as she reached for a glass of lemonade from the refreshment table with hands that no longer trembled at social slights, that the massive doors of the ballroom swung open with ceremonial flourish. Piers Grantley, Marquess of Silverton, entered the glittering assembly after 4 full years of conspicuous absence from London society. His tall figure commanded immediate attention from every person present and every unmarried woman in the room, from the freshest debutante to the most desperate widow, felt her heart quicken with the impossible, irrational hope that perhaps fortune might smile upon her this season. If stories of love that defies society's cruelest judgments and proves that hope can bloom even in the most weathered hearts move you, subscribe now and join us on this extraordinary journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The murmur that rippled through the assembled company at Lord Silverton's dramatic entrance was as palpable as the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure before a summer storm. From her position near the column, Octavia observed Lady Caroline Fairford lean toward her daughter Honoria, her fan fluttering with aggressive, barely suppressed excitement. The mother's eyes tracked the Marquess's progress through the room with the focused intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Octavia did not need to hear the words exchanged behind the intricately painted fan. The intent was as clear as the diamonds at Lady Caroline's throat. This was a campaign, and the Marquess was the target. It was common knowledge that Lord Fairford's gaming habits had left the family in a precarious position. Only a match of spectacular wealth could secure their future. Honoria Fairford, at precisely 22 years of age, was the instrument of that salvation. She was, indeed, the acknowledged diamond of the current season. Her carefully cultivated appearance, the result of years of maternal planning and considerable financial investment. Her golden curls had been arranged in artful ringlets that framed a face of porcelain perfection. Her sky-blue eyes were accented by the most fashionable gown money could procure, and her deportment was beyond reproach, having been drilled into her by the most expensive instructors available. She had already prompted 3 quite respectable proposals from perfectly acceptable gentlemen during her debut season, all of which her ambitious mother had rejected without hesitation as woefully insufficient. Only a title as elevated and a fortune as substantial as those possessed by the Marquess of Silverton would satisfy Lady Caroline's aspirations for her only daughter. Octavia observed this maternal machination from her position of carefully calculated obscurity near the refreshment table, feeling neither envy nor hope stirring in her breast. She had learnt long ago, through bitter experience and countless disappointments, not to waste her limited emotional resources on impossible dreams or futile wishes. Her role in these glittering assemblies was perfectly defined. She attended to lend her brother respectability, to serve as a cautionary tale to younger women about the dire consequences of a damaged reputation, and to fill out the numbers at dinner parties where an extra lady was required to balance the seating arrangements. Her brother Edward, Lord Drummond, approached through the crowd with 2 glasses of lemonade, his handsome face creased with the familiar expression of brotherly concern that she had come to both appreciate and resent in equal measure. "Tavi," he said quietly, using the childhood nickname he had never abandoned despite her advancing years. "You need not subject yourself to this tedious charade every season. My dear Charlotte and I would be perfectly content, indeed positively delighted, to have you remain at Drummond House permanently. The children adore you beyond measure, and your presence brings nothing but joy to our household." Octavia accepted the proffered glass, her fingers brushing his in a gesture of affection. "And what sort of example would that present to your daughters, Edward? That a woman should hide herself away in perpetual shame for something that was never her fault to begin with? That she should allow society's unjust judgment to define the entire arc of her existence? No, dear brother. I may not dance anymore, having long ago accepted that particular loss, but I absolutely refuse to disappear entirely from view as though I were something shameful that must be concealed from polite company." Before Edward could formulate his response, the assembly shifted with the sudden coordinated movement of a flock of birds sensing the approach of a predator. Conversation died away in progressive waves, replaced by an electric silence charged with anticipation and speculation. Lord Silverton was moving through the crowded ballroom, his tall, imposing figure cutting a path as effortlessly as Moses parting the Red Sea. But instead of approaching the strategic cluster of debutantes and their hovering mothers who had positioned themselves with mathematical precision in his likely path, he turned with deliberate purpose directly toward the refreshment table, directly toward Octavia. The collective intake of breath was audible throughout the entire ballroom. Octavia felt her brother stiffen with protective alarm beside her, felt what seemed like several hundred pairs of eyes boring into her back with the intensity of physical pressure, felt her own heart begin to race with a confusing mixture of apprehension, confusion, and something she dared not name. Her mind raced frantically through possible explanations for this utterly unprecedented occurrence. Was it some form of elaborate cruel jest designed to humiliate her publicly? Some variety of revenge for a slight she could not recall committing? Had he perhaps confused her with someone else in the crowd? "Lady Octavia Drummond," Lord Silverton said when he reached her position, his deep voice carrying a warmth and familiarity that seemed profoundly at odds with his 4-year absence from London society and his complete lack of prior acquaintance with her. "I confess I was hoping most sincerely that I might find you attending this evening's entertainment. Would you do me the very great honor of partnering me for the next dance?" The ballroom's silence deepened impossibly further, becoming so absolute that the faint sound of carriage wheels on the street outside could be heard through the tall windows. Octavia stared at the Marquess, her usually sharp mind temporarily paralyzed by sheer incomprehension. She studied his face carefully, searching for signs of mockery or malicious intent, but found only what appeared to be genuine warmth and unmistakable interest in his gray eyes. "My Lord Silverton," she finally managed, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaos of her thoughts. "I fear you have mistaken me for someone else entirely. We have not been formally introduced through any mutual acquaintance, nor have we been presented to one another at any prior social occasion." A slight smile touched his well-formed lips, transforming his rather severe features into something approaching handsomeness. "Have we not? Then I must correct my error immediately. I distinctly remember a most stimulating conversation at the Lansdowne Country House party 7 years ago. You were discussing the philosophical works of Mary Wollstonecraft with remarkable insight and uncommon eloquence, while everyone else in attendance seemed content to focus exclusively on gossip, cards, and the latest scandals. I have not forgotten a single word of that discourse, nor the impression you made upon me that afternoon. 7 years, before the death of his wife from complications of childbed fever, before his subsequent departure from England to tour the continent and beyond. Octavia did remember that house party, recalled that rare conversation with a gentleman who had actually listened to her thoughts, rather than immediately dismissing her opinions or offering her nothing but pitying small talk, designed to acknowledge her existence while maintaining proper social distance. She had been 32 then, already well past the age when women were expected to have secured their futures, already resigned to permanent spinsterhood. "I remember that conversation, my lord," she admitted quietly, conscious of the rapt attention being paid to every word they exchanged. "You were most gracious in your attention to my amateur observations on a subject that has long interested me." "Amateur? On the contrary, your analysis was more cogent and well-reasoned than most published treatises I have encountered on the subject." He extended his hand toward her with such deliberate, unmistakable intention that to refuse would create a scandal perhaps even more damaging than accepting. "The waltz awaits us, Lady Octavia. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my partner?" Her hand trembled visibly as she placed it in his larger, warmer one. The touch, even filtered through the requisite barrier of their gloves, sent an unexpected current of warmth, traveling up her arm and settling somewhere in the region of her heart. As he led her onto the polished dance floor with the assured movements of a man accustomed to command, the whispers that had been temporarily suppressed by shock erupted throughout the room like a swarm of angry bees disturbed from their carefully constructed hive. "Is the Marquess quite mad? Dancing with that woman of all people? She must be nearly 40 years old, if not already past that unfortunate milestone. Does he not know about the terrible scandal involving Lord Quentin Vale? How she shamelessly threw herself at a married man more than twice her age? Perhaps his time abroad has addled his wits. Foreign climates can have the most deleterious effects on English constitutions. My dear, he could have any woman present, any young beauty fresh from the schoolroom. Why would he choose her?" Octavia had developed, through 2 decades of relentless practice, the ability to ignore such cruel commentary, to let the poisonous words slide past her consciousness like water off oiled silk. But she felt Lord Silverton's hand tighten fractionally at her waist in response to the audible insults. When he spoke, his voice was pitched low enough that only she could hear his words over the opening strains of the waltz. "Let them talk until their tongues grow weary, Lady Octavia. I find their opinions and judgments hold remarkably little value or interest for me." The music began in earnest, and they moved together with surprising ease, considering they had never danced together previously. Octavia discovered that her body remembered the steps and patterns of the waltz, as if no time had passed since her last dance more than 2 decades ago, when she had been a hopeful 19-year-old girl who still believed the world was fundamentally just. "Why?" she asked quietly, as they executed a graceful turn, acutely conscious of his hand at her waist, his nearness, the distinctive scent of sandalwood, and something indefinably masculine that clung to him. "Why this extraordinarily public demonstration when you could have literally any woman in this room, any fresh young beauty with an untarnished reputation and a promising future?" His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch painfully in her throat. "Because I have spent 4 years traveling extensively throughout Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and even briefly to the Americas, observing countless different societies and their various customs and conventions. I have learnt through this experience that worth is not accurately measured by youth or an unblemished reputation, but rather by genuine strength of character, depth of spirit, and capacity for resilience in the face of adversity. I recall a woman who spoke of philosophy while others spoke only of hats. That is the woman I see before me now. You know absolutely nothing substantial about me, my lord," she protested, even as hope began to unfurl tentatively in her chest like a flower attempting to bloom in barren soil. "Do I not?" His voice remained quiet, but absolutely certain. "I know that you read philosophy in 3 languages, maintained correspondence with several continental scholars, and once told me during that memorable conversation 7 years ago that the greatest tragedy in human life is not failure itself, but rather the failure to attempt what one's heart truly desires. These are not the attributes of a shallow or unworthy soul, Lady Octavia. These are the attributes of the woman I came here hoping to find. The waltz concluded far too quickly for Octavia's suddenly hopeful heart. As Lord Silverton escorted her from the dance floor with meticulous attention to proper form, she became acutely, almost painfully aware of the hostile and disbelieving stares directed at her from every corner of the crowded ballroom. Lady Honoria Fairford's delicate features were contorted with undisguised fury, her sky-blue eyes blazing with jealous rage, while her mother's expression promised swift and merciless retribution for this unexpected interference with their carefully laid matrimonial plans. Edward materialized at her elbow, the very instant Lord Silverton bowed and departed to speak with their host. "Tavy, what in heaven's name just occurred? The man has not participated in London society for 4 years, and his very first action upon returning is to single you out in the most spectacularly public manner imaginable." "I honestly have no earthly idea, Edward," Octavia admitted, still feeling the phantom sensation of his lordship's hand at her waist, the warmth of his grey eyes as they held hers. "But I strongly suspect this unexpected attention will make my already complicated life considerably more difficult in ways I can scarcely begin to imagine." She could not have imagined, could not possibly have foreseen how prophetic those particular words would prove to be. The following morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the breakfast room at Drummond House, where Octavia sat with her sister-in-law Charlotte, attempting without success to focus on the newspaper before her. Her thoughts kept returning obsessively to the previous evening, replaying every word of their conversation, analyzing every nuance of his expression. It was precisely then that a liveried footman entered bearing a crystal vase of extraordinary beauty, filled to overflowing with 24 perfect white roses whose petals seemed to glow with their own inner light. The accompanying card, written in an elegant masculine hand, bore only a brief message. For dignity maintained in the face of profound injustice. P.G. Octavia stared at the magnificent arrangement with a confusing mixture of wonder, apprehension, and barely suppressed hope. White roses held specific meaning in the complex language of flowers. They signified virtue, reverence, and purity of intention. They were decidedly not the sort of flowers one sent to a woman of questionable reputation unless one intended to make a very particular and unmistakable statement about one's own beliefs regarding her character. "Good heavens above," Charlotte exclaimed, setting down her teacup with enough force to rattle the delicate porcelain. "Who on earth has sent such an extravagant arrangement? Those roses must have cost an absolute fortune this early in the season when hothouse flowers command such premium prices." "Lord Silverton," Octavia replied quietly, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched one perfect petal. Charlotte's eyes widened dramatically. "The Marquess of Silverton? But Tavy, surely you understand what this means. He is courting you, publicly and deliberately courting you, with all of society watching and speculating." "That cannot possibly be his intention. It makes no logical sense whatsoever," Octavia protested, even as her heart insisted on entertaining the impossible possibility. "He is 41 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and possessed of one of the most elevated titles in England. He could have his choice of any young woman in the kingdom, any fresh beauty with an unblemished reputation and substantial dowry. Why would he possibly choose me, a woman nearly 40 years old with a thoroughly ruined reputation and no prospects whatsoever?" "Perhaps," Charlotte suggested gently, "because he sees something in you that others have been too blind or too prejudiced to recognize. Perhaps because he values qualities that society generally overlooks in its obsession with youth and conventional beauty. Or perhaps, dear Tavi, because he is simply a man of uncommon sense who recognizes genuine worth when he encounters it." Over the following days and weeks, Lord Silverton's intentions became increasingly, undeniably clear to all of London society. More white roses arrived each morning without fail, accompanied by carefully selected books he thought might interest her based on their conversation 7 years ago, invitations to ride with him in Hyde Park during the fashionable promenade hour when all of society would witness their companionship, and formal requests to call upon her during proper visiting hours at Drummond House. The ton was scandalized and fascinated in equal measure. Gossip sheets speculated wildly about the Marquess's motivations, publishing increasingly outlandish theories. Some suggested he had lost his mental faculties during his extensive travels through exotic foreign lands. Others proposed that perhaps he was conducting an elaborate jest at Lady Octavia's expense, a cruel game that would end in her public humiliation. A precious few whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, the Marquess knew something about the veil scandal that others did not, some truth that had been concealed for 20 long years. Lady Honoria Fairford's carefully cultivated poise began to crack visibly under the strain of watching her intended matrimonial prize slip away. Her jealousy, initially confined to sharp glances and snippy comments, gradually transformed into something far more dangerous and calculating. Octavia observed the young woman's increasingly hostile behavior with growing unease, but attributed it merely to wounded vanity and disappointed ambition. She did not yet realize the depths to which jealousy could drive a desperate soul, nor how far Lady Honoria would go to eliminate a perceived rival. On their third outing together in Hyde Park, as they rode sedately along the fashionable Rotten Row on matched bay horses borrowed from the Silverton stables, Lord Silverton finally addressed directly the enormous obstacle that stood between them like an insurmountable wall. "Lady Octavia, we must speak with absolute frankness about a matter that concerns us both deeply. The whispers that have followed you for 2 decades." Octavia's hands tightened convulsively on her reins, causing her mare to toss her head in mild protest. "Then you know with certainty that I am entirely unsuitable as a companion for a man of your elevated standing and impeccable reputation, my lord. Those whispers are a chorus." "I know," he replied with careful deliberation, his gray eyes fixed intently on her face. "Only what I see before me, a woman of profound dignity. And what I remember, a man, Lord Quentin Vale, whom I always knew to be a degenerate of the highest order. I know that society, as it so often does in such deplorable situations, chooses to believe the powerful man over the blameless woman. I believe the society that condemned you is the true villain." The words, spoken aloud by someone other than her brother, hit Octavia with the force of a physical blow to her chest. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes, despite her best efforts at maintaining her composure. She blinked them back furiously, unwilling to display such weakness in such a public venue where dozens of curious eyes tracked their every movement and expression. "You must not. My reputation is poison. It will taint you. That is a risk I am more than willing to take." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "I am not asking about your past, Lady Octavia. I am asking about you. I will not allow rumor and innuendo to dictate my choices." Before Octavia could formulate any sort of coherent response to this extraordinary declaration, a sharp, artificially sweet voice cut through the moment like a blade through silk. Lady Caroline Fairford had maneuvered her elegant barouche alongside their horses with obvious, deliberate intent, her expression a masterpiece of false concern and calculated malice. "Lord Silverton, what an unexpected pleasure to encounter you here during the promenade hour. My darling daughter Honoria has been hoping most ardently for an opportunity to speak with you regarding a small gathering she is organizing tomorrow evening at Fairford House. She would be absolutely delighted if you would honor us with your distinguished presence." The Marquess barely spared Lady Caroline a glance, his attention remaining fixed on Octavia's face. "I fear I must respectfully decline your invitation, Lady Caroline. I have already accepted an engagement to dine with Lord Drummond and his family tomorrow evening." "Indeed? How charmingly loyal of you to renew old acquaintances." Lady Caroline's tone made it abundantly clear she found nothing charming about the situation whatsoever. "One might almost think you harbored romantic intentions toward Lady Octavia, But of course that would be utterly absurd. A man of your standing and prospects could never seriously consider such an obviously unsuitable match with a woman of her advanced years and thoroughly compromised reputation. The insult was delivered with a brittle smile, but its poison was as unmistakable as arsenic in wine. Octavia felt her face flush hot with humiliation. She had endured countless such veiled and overt insults over the past 20 years, had developed layers of protective emotional calluses to shield herself from their sting. But never before had she been forced to endure such deliberate cruelty in the presence of someone whose good opinion mattered so profoundly to her. Lord Silverton's expression hardened into something approaching genuine anger, though his voice remained rigidly controlled. On the contrary, Lady Caroline, I find Lady Octavia to be the most eminently suitable woman I have ever had the privilege of encountering in all my years of social participation. Her intelligence, genuine compassion, extraordinary resilience, and strength of character far exceed the shallow accomplishments and manufactured graces of any debutante I have had the misfortune to meet. If you will excuse us, we have important matters to discuss privately. He urged his horse forward with enough abruptness to constitute a deliberate cut, leaving Lady Caroline speechless and visibly trembling with rage in their wake. Octavia followed, her heart pounding with a confusing mixture of profound gratitude, persistent terror, and something that felt dangerously akin to hope. "You should not have spoken to her in such a manner, my lord," Octavia said quietly, once they had achieved sufficient distance to speak without being overheard by the crowds of fascinated observers. "You have made a powerful and vindictive enemy today through your defense of me. Let her constitute my enemy then. I care not one whit for her opinion or her potential machinations." He paused, then added with unexpected heat coloring his usually controlled tone, "But I will not stand idle and silent while anyone, regardless of their social position or connections, demeans or insults you in my hearing. Those who choose to do so will discover very quickly indeed that the Marquess of Silverton is not a forgiving man when his principles or his affections are engaged." True to his passionate declaration, Lord Silverton began systematically withdrawing his considerable patronage and influence from any establishment or individual who demonstrated disrespect toward Octavia. When Lady Morton made a particularly cutting remark about weathered spinsters at a musicale, comparing them unfavorably to fresh flowers, Silverton immediately and very publicly cancelled his substantial subscription to her husband's speculative investment venture, causing financial embarrassment and social awkwardness. When Lord Ashfield had the temerity to question the Marquess's judgment in choosing his companions during a gentlemen's club evening, Silverton quietly but effectively informed 3 of London's most prominent clubs that he would resign his membership immediately if Ashfield remained welcome in their establishments, forcing the clubs to choose between them. The Ton learned with remarkable rapidity that snubbing or insulting Lady Octavia Drummond now carried significant social and financial consequences that extended far beyond simple disapproval. Invitations that had ceased arriving at Drummond House years ago began reappearing with increasing frequency, delivered by apologetic footmen. Women who had whispered cruel gossip and spread malicious rumors for 2 decades now offered nervous smiles and awkward greetings when Octavia entered a room. Gentlemen who had deliberately looked through her as though she were invisible now bowed with exaggerated courtesy. But this sudden and dramatic reversal of her social fortune, rather than bringing relief or satisfaction, made Octavia profoundly uneasy. She found herself enjoying Lord Silverton's company far more than was prudent or wise for someone in her precarious position. His conversation challenged her intellectually in ways she had forgotten were possible. His presence made her feel valued and respected as an individual rather than merely tolerated as an object of pity. His evident regard awakened feelings she had believed permanently buried beneath 20 years of disappointment and resignation. Yet doubt gnawed at her relentlessly, whispering insidious questions during the quiet hours of night. What if his interest stemmed from pity rather than genuine affection? What if his sense of justice and honor had driven him to right a perceived wrong through a misguided rescue? What if he eventually came to regret choosing her over younger, more suitable candidates? During a dinner at Drummond House one evening in late April, with spring fully established and the season approaching its crescendo, Octavia finally gave voice to these persistent concerns. The meal had concluded satisfactorily, and Lord Silverton had remained afterward to share tea with her in the drawing room, while Edward and Charlotte tactfully withdrew to attend to correspondence, leaving them alone together, save for the presence of Charlotte's maid in the corner, serving as chaperone. "My lord, I must speak with complete honesty about a matter that troubles me deeply," Octavia began, setting down her delicate teacup with careful precision. "I fear you are allowing pity to cloud your judgment regarding me." He set down his own cup with equally deliberate care, his gray eyes sharp with sudden attention. "Pity? Is that truly what you believe motivates my actions and attentions toward you? What else could possibly explain your interest in me?" The words emerged more sharply than she intended, edged with 20 years of accumulated pain and disappointment. "You pity the lonely spinster who has suffered unjustly through no fault of her own. Your admirable sense of honor and justice compels you to attempt to right this wrong through some misguided notion of rescue. But pity, however nobly motivated, is no foundation whatsoever for the sort of permanent connection you speak of creating. You think me incapable of recognizing and understanding my own feelings and motivations?" There was an edge to his voice now, something harder than she had heard from him previously. "Lady Octavia, I am 41 years old, not some callow youth of 20 prone to mistaking sentiment for substance. I was married for 12 years to a woman I respected deeply but never loved with any romantic passion. I have spent 4 years traveling the world extensively, searching restlessly for something I could not name or identify. Then I returned to London and saw you standing in that overcrowded ballroom, beautiful and dignified and utterly isolated, bearing your social exile with a grace that put every shallow beauty present to complete shame. In that precise moment, I finally understood exactly what I had been seeking throughout my travels." "Beautiful!" Octavia could not suppress the bitter laugh that escaped her lips. "My lord, I am nearly 40 years old. Whatever beauty I may have once possessed in my youth has long since faded irretrievably." He rose from his chair with sudden decisive movement and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her in a gesture so intimate and unexpected that it made her breath catch painfully in her throat. His hands grasped hers gently but firmly, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that felt almost unbearable. "Beauty is not the exclusive property or domain of youth, Lady Octavia. That is a lie perpetuated by a society that values novelty over substance. Your face bears the marks of your experiences, yes, and I treasure every single one of them. The lines at your eyes speak of laughter shared and sorrow endured. The wisdom evident in your gaze reflects a depth and understanding that no untested debutante can possibly match. The strength visible in your bearing demonstrates resilience that comes only through surviving genuine hardship. To me, you are the most beautiful woman in all of England, precisely because you are 39 years old and have lived every single moment of those years with courage and integrity." Octavia felt tears spilling down her cheeks, despite her desperate efforts to maintain her composure. No one had spoken to her this way since before the scandal destroyed her life. No one had looked at her as if she held genuine value beyond her utility as cautionary tale or her service as unpaid governess to her brother's children. "I am so frightened," she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep within her carefully guarded heart. Frightened to hope when hope has always, inevitably, led only to crushing disappointment and renewed pain. "Then allow me to hope enough for both of us," he replied, his voice gentler now, his thumbs stroking the backs of her hands through their gloves. "Let me prove through my actions and my constancy that I am worthy of your trust. I ask only that you do not refuse me out of fear alone. Do not let 2 decades of unjust treatment rob you of the happiness you deserve." She wanted desperately to believe him. Heaven help her, She wanted to believe that this extraordinary man truly saw worth in her weathered soul, that his interest stemmed from genuine affection rather than misguided pity or noble obligation. But 20 years of rejection and disappointment had taught her to protect her heart with walls of stone reinforced by bitter experience. "I need time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to be absolutely certain this is real and not simply a noble gesture you will eventually come to regret bitterly." He raised her hands to his lips in a gesture that felt achingly tender, despite the barrier of their gloves. "Take all the time you require, Lady Octavia. I am a patient man, and you are worth waiting for however long necessary." As spring deepened inexorably toward summer, Lord Silverton's courtship continued with unwavering dedication and remarkable consistency that astounded those who witnessed it. He accompanied Octavia to Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly, patiently browsing for hours while she examined volumes on philosophy, natural science, and political economy, never once suggesting she hurry or displaying the boredom most gentlemen would feel. He engaged her in spirited debates about the Corn Laws, the movements for social reform sweeping through manufacturing districts, and the merits of various literary works, treating her well-informed opinions with genuine respect and intellectual engagement, rather than the condescending tolerance most men showed when women dared express views on serious subjects. During their rides in Hyde Park, he shared details of his extensive travels, describing the ancient ruins of Greece, the bazaars of Constantinople, and the emerging democracy of America with vivid eloquence that transported her imagination to distant shores. He asked her opinions on matters of estate management, sought her counsel regarding charitable endeavors he was considering, and made it abundantly clear through both word and consistent deed to all of London society that Lady Octavia Drummond was firmly under his powerful protection and that anyone who threatened or insulted her would face swift and serious consequences extending far beyond mere social disapproval. Their growing intimacy was conducted with scrupulous attention to propriety. Yet Octavia found herself looking forward to each encounter with an anticipation she had not experienced in decades. The sound of his voice reading poetry aloud in her brother's library, the warmth of his smile when she made an observation that amused or impressed him, the gentle pressure of his hand helping her into his curricle. These small moments accumulated like treasures in a chest, precious beyond measure. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, like ancient ice melting under persistent spring sunshine, Octavia began to believe that perhaps, impossibly, this extraordinary development might actually be real and lasting. Perhaps after enduring 20 long years of crushing exile and profound loneliness, she might finally be permitted by fate to truly live again, to dare to hope again, to risk her battered heart and love again. It was precisely then, when her defenses were finally beginning to lower and hope was tentatively taking root in her long barren heart, that Lady Honoria Fairford struck with devastating precision. The scandal erupted on a Wednesday morning in early May, 3 weeks before the season's most important ball. Octavia was reading peacefully in the morning room at Drummond House, enjoying the sunlight streaming through the tall windows and the relative tranquility of the household at this early hour, when Edward burst through the door with complete disregard for propriety, his face ashen and his hands trembling as he clutched a crumpled news sheet. "Tavi, you must see this immediately. Someone has published letters allegedly written by you to Lord Silverton's late father over a period of many years." Octavia's blood turned instantly to ice in her veins. "That is completely impossible. I never corresponded with the late Marquess beyond perhaps 2 brief, utterly conventional notes of condolence after his wife's death. I barely knew the man personally." "These letters suggest you knew him extraordinarily well indeed. Intimately, in fact." Edward's voice shook with barely controlled rage and profound distress. "They purport to document an illicit affair spanning more than 10 years. They contain specific details about private assignations, expensive gifts exchanged, even intimate family matters that only someone extremely close to the Silverton family would possibly know." Octavia snatched the news sheet from his trembling hands, her eyes scanning the printed text with growing horror and disbelief. The letters were absolutely damning, describing in explicit detail a passionate and long-lasting affair between herself and a married man old enough to be her father, painting her as a calculating and ruthless seductress who had deliberately pursued the late Marquess with relentless and shameless determination, caring nothing for his marriage vows or the damage to his family. Every single word was a complete and utter lie, but they were remarkably convincing lies, filled with details and references that would be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to disprove without extensive investigation. Who would do something this malicious and elaborate? Octavia whispered. But even as the question left her lips, she knew the answer with absolute certainty. Lady Honoria Fairford, whose matrimonial ambitions and romantic hopes had been comprehensively thwarted by Octavia's unexpected resurrection from social death. Lady Honoria, whose mother's extensive social connections could easily have provided access to private Silverton family information sufficient to make forgeries convincing. The scandal exploded across London with the speed and destructive force of wildfire through drought-stricken woodland. Within mere hours, Octavia found herself even more thoroughly ostracized than she had been for the previous 20 years. Those who had reluctantly begun to accept her presence in society under Lord Silverton's powerful protection now openly and vociferously shunned her as though she carried plague. The invitations that had recently begun arriving at Drummond House ceased immediately. The morning callers who had tentatively started to appear disappeared entirely. Even Charlotte regarded her with troubled uncertainty and barely concealed doubt. Lord Silverton arrived at Drummond House before noon, admitted immediately by the butler despite the earliness of the hour. His expression was a thunderous mask, his usual warmth replaced by a terrible, controlled quiet. Octavia met him in the drawing room, her chin held high and her dignity intact despite the tears she had shed in the privacy of her chamber. "You must end this association immediately, my lord," she said, before he could speak, her voice steady despite the pain lancing through her chest. "Whatever your honorable intentions were toward me, this latest scandal has rendered them completely impossible. I absolutely will not allow you to be dragged down and destroyed by continued connection to me. Your reputation is far too valuable to sacrifice for my sake." His voice was dangerously calm. "Do you truly believe, even for one moment, that I would abandon you? Do you believe them?" she whispered, the question costing her everything. There was a fractional pause, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes that terrified her. "I believe," he said slowly, "that they are convincing. The details are intimate, things only someone with access to my father's private papers would know." "How?" "Lady Honoria Fairford," Octavia said, the words bitter. "Her godfather is Lord Wexford. He was your father's closest friend and executor. He would have all the archives." Silverton's eyes blazed with sudden cold understanding. "Wexford, of course, access. That explains the details, but the narrative, Octavia, it is a lie." "It is my word against this," she said, gesturing to the paper. "My word has never been enough." "Then we shall find proof," he declared, his anger replacing all doubt. "We will not let this stand. This is not mere gossip. This is a calculated attack, and we will treat it as such." He turned to Edward, who had stood silent witness. "Lord Drummond, we require your records. We must establish a timeline. Where was your sister during the dates these assignations supposedly occurred?" They retreated to the library, the three of them united against the assault. For hours they pored over household ledgers and old journals. "The letters," Silverton said, scanning the news sheet with grim precision. "Allege meetings in London. March 1809, July 1811, and all of spring 1812. Edward ran his finger down a ledger. 1811, July. Impossible. We were in Scotland, All of us. I was managing Lord Creef's estate after his death. We were there for 8 months. And 1809, Octavia suddenly breathed, her mind flashing back. That was the year of the fever. I was in Bath with Aunt Alara. I was bedridden from February until May. And 1812, Edward added, his voice thick with emotion. Our mother, she was dying in Yorkshire. Octavia never left her bedside for the last 3 months. Alibis, Silverton said, a predatory glint in his eye. Demonstrable, provable alibis. The forger, in their cleverness, became overconfident. This is the foundation of their mistake. We can disprove the letters, but how do we fight the original scandal? This new lie rests upon the old one. Edward fell silent, his face pale and troubled. He walked to his desk and unlocked a small, ornate box. There is one more thing, he said, his voice strained. Something I have kept. I did not know how to use it. It felt too little, too late. He withdrew a folded document. 3 years ago, Lord Quentin Vale, on his deathbed, sent for his solicitor. His conscience. He wrote a confession. He admitted everything. The assault, the lies he told to protect himself. "Edward!" Octavia gasped, rising from her chair. "You had this? For 3 years?" "Tavy," her brother pleaded, his eyes filled with anguish. "What good would it have done? Society would not have listened. It would have been a whisper against the hurricane of your established reputation. They would have called it a forgery, too. It would only have brought you more pain to dredge it all up. But now, combined with this public, clumsy forgery, combined with you, Lord Silverton, now it is a weapon." Silverton took the document with reverence. "A weapon? Indeed. Now, we plan our counterattack, not in the courts, in the court of public opinion. Lady Honoria wished for a scandal. We shall give her one." The climactic confrontation occurred not in a dusty chamber of government, but in the most public arena of the Ton, the Duchess of Richmond's annual ball, the apex of the London season. All of society was present, drawn by the promise of the most spectacular scandal in a decade. When Lord Silverton and Lady Octavia Drummond entered the ballroom, a hush fell so completely that the orchestra's music faltered and stopped. The whispers were like the hissing of snakes. Octavia, wearing ivory silk and the Silverton sapphires, loaned to her for the evening, held her head high, her hand firmly on the Marquess's arm. He did not wait. He strode to the center of the floor and raised his voice, commanding the attention of every peer, debutante, and dowager. "My lords, ladies, you have all read the gossip sheets. You have all enjoyed the spectacle of Lady Octavia Drummond's name being dragged through the mud once more. A wave of nervous murmurs. You read letters," he boomed, "alleging an affair with my late father. Today I bring you the truth." He produced a sheaf of papers. "I have here household ledgers proving that on the dates of these London assignations, Lady Octavia was in Bath, recovering from a fever. She was in Scotland with her brother's family, and she was in Yorkshire at her own mother's deathbed." He turned his gaze, cold as steel, upon a pale-faced Lord Wexford. "My lord, you are Lady Honoria Fairford's godfather. Did you, or did you not, grant her access to my father's private papers last month?" Wexford stammered, trapped. Yes. She claimed to be preparing a memorial volume for my old friend." "She prepared a forgery," Silverton declared. Lady Honoria let out a small, strangled cry, and her mother looked moments from fainting. The Ton turned as one to stare at the exposed pair. "That," Silverton continued, his voice softening not one bit, "deals with the recent lie. Now, we must address the original one." Edward stepped forward, his face resolute. "I have in my hand," he announced, his voice carrying clearly, "the signed and witnessed deathbed confession of Lord Quentin Vale, dated 3 years ago." The chamber erupted. Edward read the confession in its entirety. He read of the attempted assault. He read of Vale's lies, fabricated to protect his own name at the expense of a 19-year-old girl. He read of a man's final, desperate plea for forgiveness. When he finished, there was a long, stunned silence, and then the Duchess of Richmond herself walked across the floor and curtsied deeply to Lady Octavia. "My dear," the Duchess said, her voice trembling with emotion, "society has failed you. I have failed you. I beg your forgiveness." The dam broke. The room rushed forward, apologies and congratulations tumbling over one another. Lady Honoria and Lady Caroline had already fled in disgrace. Later that evening, in the quiet drawing room of Drummond House, the adrenaline of the public vindication began to fade. Octavia stood by the window, watching the moonlight on the square. "It is done," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "After 20 years. Piers came to stand beside her, taking her hands. "It is the beginning. The truth is restored." "I do not know how to thank you," she said, turning to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do not thank me," he said softly. "Join me." He knelt, as he had once before, but this time not in reassurance. This time, in supplication. "Lady Octavia Drummond, you have waited patiently for 20 long years for the truth. You have endured with remarkable grace and unshakable dignity what would have utterly destroyed a weaker soul. You are strong where I am stubborn, patient where I am proud, compassionate where I am severe, and wise where I am willful. You complement and complete me in every way that truly matters. You are my equal in intellect, my superior in resilience, and my perfect match in every respect. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife and the Marchioness of Silverton?" Octavia rose from her seat on trembling legs. Tears streamed unchecked down her face, but for the first time in 20 years of weeping, they were tears of pure joy rather than bitter grief. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice steady despite her emotional state. "Yes, my dearest Piers, I will marry you with profound gratitude and overflowing happiness." He rose and swept her into his arms holding her as though he would never release her. "I love you beyond measure," he whispered fervently against her hair. "Not despite your years or your scars or your history, but because of them, because they have shaped you into the remarkable woman you are today." "I love you with all my heart," she replied, finally permitting herself to fully believe in this impossible happiness. "But Piers, now that I have this power, a name, resources, I cannot be the only one. I cannot let this stand for others." He drew back, looking at her with adoration. "What do you mean, my love?" "There are other women," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Women falsely accused, victimized by circumstance, condemned by society just as I was. I want to establish a foundation, to provide legal assistance, financial aid, a safe haven, to ensure that no other woman has to wait 20 years for her justice." He smiled, a slow, warm smile that lit his gray eyes. "The Lady Octavia Foundation. I can think of no better legacy. We shall begin at once." Lady Honoria Fairford's social ruin was swift, absolute, and utterly merciless. Faced with irrefutable evidence of her deliberate forgery and criminal defamation, and her family's precarious finances, she was immediately forced to leave London in complete disgrace. Her mother, Lady Caroline's own social position, crumbled in sympathetic destruction. Those members of society who had been so swift and eager to believe the very worst of Octavia now fell over themselves in their haste to offer profuse apologies. Octavia graciously accepted some of the more sincere apologies, but politely declined the vast majority of social invitations. She discovered she had absolutely no interest whatsoever in rejoining a society that had treated her with such sustained cruelty for 2 full decades. Instead, she focused her considerable energy and attention on preparing for her upcoming wedding and planning the meaningful life she would build together with Lord Silverton. They were married in Westminster Abbey on a gloriously bright summer morning in late June. Octavia wore an elegant gown of lustrous ivory silk that flattered her mature figure, her dark hair artfully arranged and threaded with fragrant white roses, and at her throat rested a magnificent necklace of perfectly matched Silverton sapphires that had been worn by generations of marchionesses before her. As she walked slowly down the impossibly long aisle on her brother Edward's proudly offered arm, she thought with profound emotion of the terrified 19-year-old girl she had once been, unjustly blamed for violence she had courageously resisted, cruelly abandoned by the very mother who should have protected and believed her above all others. That innocent girl had genuinely believed her entire life was effectively over before it had truly begun. But that girl, she now understood with crystal clarity, had been fundamentally wrong about everything. Life had not ended. It had simply been patiently waiting, gathering strength and wisdom, preparing her thoroughly for the right moment to truly begin living. When Octavia finally reached the altar and gazed into the love shining unmistakably in Piers's gray eyes, she understood with profound certainty that some stories require decades to reach their proper and satisfying conclusion. Some gardens must lie fallow through harsh winters before they can bloom in spectacular glory. Some hearts must be tested and tempered by adversity before they can fully appreciate the precious gift of genuine love. After the ceremony concluded to enthusiastic applause as they stood together receiving congratulations, Octavia noticed several women watching her with expressions mixing hope and wonder. Women who, like herself, carried their own burdens of unjust judgment and societal condemnation. Women who had believed themselves permanently finished, their chances for happiness forever lost. She smiled at them, a smile of shared understanding and bright promise, knowing her true work was just beginning. Dear listener, in a world that often celebrates youth above all other qualities and suggests our value diminishes with each passing year, it is dangerously easy to believe that our chances for love, happiness, and new beginnings fade inevitably with time. But Octavia's extraordinary journey reminds us of an eternal truth that society often obscures. It is never too late to find genuine happiness and authentic love. Your accumulated life experience is not a liability or burden to be apologized for. Rather, it represents your greatest and most valuable strength. The patience you have cultivated, the perspective you have gained, and the resilience you have built through surviving genuine hardship are treasures beyond any price. Like Lord Silverton discovered through his own journey, the right people will recognize, value, and cherish these hard-won qualities in you. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, know with certainty that the most meaningful and beautiful chapters of your unique story may still lie ahead, waiting patiently to unfold. You are worthy of every happiness at every age, every stage, every season of your life. Your scars do not diminish your worth. They testify to your strength, your survival, and your extraordinary capacity for hope. Rest well tonight, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow brings possibilities you cannot yet imagine, and that you are exactly who you need to be in this precise moment. Thank you for journeying with us through Octavia's story of resilience and redemption. If you believe in love that transcends society's narrow definitions and proves that true worth has nothing to do with age, please subscribe, like, and share this tale with someone who needs to hear its message of hope.